Americans, my fellow Americans.
I know many Americans have questions tonight. How did we reach this point in our economy? How will the solution I propose work? And what does this mean for your financial future? These are good questions, and they deserve clear answers.
Because the issues facing this country are so enormous and in some cases so complicated, nobody in the world can honestly explain them in 45 seconds. And as a nation, we do a pretty bad job in analyzing and discussing the serious issues facing our country.
What we're doing today with pollution and the expanse of civilization and weapons are super sophisticated.
The totalitarianism and the
Authoritarian capitalism, to worldwide police state.
Where do we land on the deep state?
Well, the Controlled Substance Act.
In the Patriot Act.
We never would have imagined this. You know, specifically like that there would be this fucking global pandemic.
By the way, I'm worried about the deficit.
And all like the rise of all these crazy oligarchs.
That is what you're touching now on the heart and soul of the tragedy of American politics.
And it's been a 30, 40-year diet of bad food and booze
That's
and
right.
drugs and pills.
We've pickled ourselves on
and also the government's
arsenic
lied
water.
to us about so many things that there are genuine conspiracies, there are genuine stuff.
And our media is just trying to get us to click on things.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Kim Vanell. Italy has been facing a political crisis since its coalition government collapsed last week. The nation is struggling with an economic recession that's been made worse by the global pandemic.
Country's residents are paying the price. Once Latin America's wealthiest country, the conflict has plunged Venezuela into deep economic turmoil. Experts say it is the single largest economic collapse outside of war in at least 45 years. Hyperinflation of their currency is expected to reach 10 million% this year, making money almost worthless. Many are now unable to afford food or medical supplies. New York Times reporter Anatoly Karmanayev describes what life is like now in Venezuela in his article, Venezuela's Collapse is the worst outside of war in decades.
Venezuela has, of today, the highest inflation in the world.
Venezuelans today cannot eat. You see people eating from the garbage.
Hospitals that have massive deaths of newborns, and there is no access to medication.
A cycle of violence and street protest.
To give Venezuelans more purchasing power. The latest hike in the minimum wage means workers will receive 150,000 bolivares in cash. They also get another 150,000 in food stamps each month. Sounds like a lot, but what can you actually buy with it?
These 3 bottles of water and 2 bread rolls cost more than a quarter of the monthly wage. 300,000 is not enough to buy anything with. When you factor in transportation, food, bills, and recreational activities, you just don't have enough. A kilo of beef costs 60,000 bolivares, and a bus ticket now costs 2,000. Everything is way too expensive, and the minimum wage is not enough.
So, universal basic income. This is what this is all about.
Yes, yeah, that's what my campaign for president is all about.
That's an interesting, focus of a campaign, and very unusual. And I mean, 4 years ago, you never even thought that would have a chance at all. But this is a subject that has been gaining momentum, and I made a big shift because I had my friend Eddie Wong on once, and he was the first person to bring it up. And my initial knee-jerk reaction was, "Get the fuck out of here! Like universal basic income, just going to give people money. They're just going to be lazy. Nothing's ever going to get done. That's a terrible idea." And then I started paying attention to the rise of AI and automation and how many jobs are going to get taken away. And then once you see the actual numbers, it's pretty staggering.
Yeah, and that's how I got there, Joe. Like, I spent the last 7 years running an organization that I'd started called Venture for America, and we helped create about 3,000 jobs in Detroit, Cleveland, St. Louis, Birmingham, New Orleans, other cities around the country. And I saw that we're pouring water into a bathtub that has a giant hole ripped in the bottom, and that for every 5, 10, 50 jobs that my entrepreneurs are going to create, we're going to lose 5, 10, 50,000 jobs. So it's not just that you have artificial intelligence on the horizon. It's that we've been eating away at the most common jobs in the U.S. economy for almost 20 years now, and it's just now hitting a point where it's pushing more and more unskilled men in particular out of the workforce.
Now, are there other alternatives that you've considered other than just universal basic income, like educating people about this being a real issue and perhaps pushing them or directing them towards other occupations?
Yeah, so that's the recipe that most people are attracted to. So I just want to unpack the numbers a little bit more so people have a sense. I looked into the data as to how good we were at retraining, let's say, displaced manufacturing workers in the Midwest when we started decimating their jobs, and we're terrible at it. Like, according to independent studies, government-funded retraining programs had a success rate of between 0 and 15% in real life. Like, this is what actually happened to the workers of Michigan and Indiana and Ohio. And so if you say we're going to retrain these people, then you also have to come up with a way for us to become amazing at something that right now we're really, really bad at.
Yet in holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite.
Look, the minimum wage has not been raised in 10 years. It is now $7.25 an hour, which is clearly unacceptable. The cost of housing, California, all over this country, is rising fairly rapidly. People can't afford health care, can't afford college. I don't think it's asking our employers too much to pay at least $15 an hour minimum.
We're in the midst of a serious financial crisis.
Here's the reality, that we can't have a shutdown for 4 to 6 months. We'll destroy the economy. It can't happen. We're going to have to start going back to work in however that looks.
In bubbles?
However that looks. I mean, the reality is, if nobody has the virus but nobody's eating, that's also not good.
Yeah, starving to death.
So we need some level of business to kind of come back.
In the snows of North Dakota, they were digging in for the long haul. This camp is the largest gathering of Native Americans in living memory. They had come here to fight a pipeline which they say desecrated sacred sites and threatened tribal waters. The £3 billion pipeline is almost complete, apart from a short section under the Missouri. Energy Transfer Partners insist its project is safe and legal. Now, though, the US Army has decided not to grant permission for that final stretch, saying alternate routes should be explored.
But on the night of November 20th, the movement would get its first taste of what the winter meant for direct action on the high plains.
Next tonight here to the new flashpoint in the pipeline showdown in North Dakota. Hundreds of protesters clashing with police in riot gear, trying to block the pipeline's construction.
Straight to breaking developments in the US right now, where rioters are burning down Minneapolis.
The family of George Floyd has made an emotional appeal for justice as protests continue across the country despite curfews and threats of force.
You can see police here now firing tear gas into the crowd. They are trying to push these folks back. Earlier today, just a few blocks away, there was looting underway nearby. Police seem to have had enough.
The nation erupted into scenes of chaos, violence, and widespread destruction into the early morning hours. Dozens of American cities up in flames after some protests turned into riots. Often followed by looting, as a nation simmering with unrest unraveled.
How long can you be peaceful when your people are dying?
In Los Angeles, hours before a curfew was ordered, the city became a war zone. After attempting to breach television studios, large groups torched police cruisers as officers fired back with rubber bullets.
As the fog of mayhem dissipates, the full picture of the terror, the crisis that took place in the nation's capital on Wednesday is coming into focus.
To Amelia Adams in Washington, D.C. Amelia, protesters and police are still clashing on the doorstep of the White House.
Mark, we have just moved one block from the White House, and this is the scene in Washington, D.C. Thousands of protesters who had gathered quite peacefully for the most part at the president's doorstep.
The United Nations has condemned the use of lethal force against peaceful protesters in Myanmar after it said at least 18 demonstrators had been killed. It's the bloodiest day of clashes since military leaders seized power 4 weeks ago.
The United Nations says 38 people have been killed during protests in Myanmar in the worst day of violence since the military coup last month. Security forces opened fire on large crowds in several cities across the country, despite...
The catalyst for Hong Kong's worst political crisis and social unrest since its return to Chinese sovereignty in 1997 was Chief Executive Carrie Lam's move to allow the transfer of fugitives to Taiwan. Opponents feared the new law could be used as a tool for the political persecution of Beijing's critics.
If that extradition bill had gone through, then I may be already sitting today in a jail in China, because he could just officially get us back on some trumped-up charges.
Veteran opposition figure Martin Lee, one of the founding fathers of the city's pro-democracy movement, was among the many who refused to buy the government's assurances that the extradition law would have built-in protections against such abuse, and local courts would have the final say on any transfer of fugitives.
They saw the danger. Once I suppose the people knew that this is so dangerous, anybody could be just brought back to China for trial, and that would apply to any visitor to Hong Kong. That's how the extensive damage it will cause to people's freedom.
The other alternative would have been for me to march those police officers down that road into a massive crowd with a lot of persons overhead who we knew were armed with bricks and all sorts of objects, and there could have been huge casualties for the police.
林鄭佢決定同103萬嘅市民對着幹，佢唯一嘅武器就係警察，佢就係預咗用警察嚟將香港人打到唔再出聲。
Despite the police action, the protesters blocking LegCo did have a victory that day. The extradition law had been stopped in its tracks.
They did the trick. It stopped the pro-Beijing members of the legislature from going into the building to pass the bill into law. But for that sort of force, the bill would be passed. There's no doubt about it.
3 days later, on the eve of another mass protest, Carrie Lam announced the suspension of the bill to try and calm the situation.
I now announce that the government has decided to suspend the legislative amendment exercise.
We gather here to honor the courage of ordinary Americans willing to endure billy clubs and the chastening rod, tear gas and the trampling hoof. Men and women who, despite the gush of blood and splintered bone, would stay true to their North Star and keep marching towards justice.
But what is justice and what is peace? It's just a slogan, but they feel good saying it. No justice, no peace. But I don't know what you're saying, but you feel very passionate about what you're saying, and I think if you pulled one of those kids aside and said, what's your message, and what are you trying to do? I think a lot of them would have nothing to say. And that's very concerning to me. So what's the solution? The solution is clearly not, smashing of businesses and looting and just people running in wild, complete, unrestrained gangs, and just committing violent acts at random. So,
because a lot of cities like Philadelphia, and I don't know why they're doing this, have announced they're not prosecuting.
That's right.
Or they're not going to arrest petty crimes. And what they consider petty crimes amazing. It's like burglary, vandalism, auto theft.
I'm going to read this for you right now. Philly police officers are instructed to stop making arrests for the following list are what are considered non-violent crimes. All narcotics offenses, theft from persons, retail theft, theft from auto, burglary, vandalism, all bench warrants, stolen auto, economic crimes, prostitution. Get it, ladies and gents. So those we will not be...
So you have kind of the perfect storm of like the economy's in the toilet, and now also we've told people that you can also just be a criminal.
Yeah.
Like there's people in Philly right now that are like, should I be a criminal? Say Philly was doing that.
So they want anarchy to set in.
Well, why the hell would they announce that they're doing it?
Yep.
Even if you were going to do that.
You would just tell cops. You don't need to tell everyone to make them panic.
Why in God's name would you put that out into the media?
I'm listening.
It's going to get probably... Now, the only reason I think they're doing this, and this is obviously based on nothing but my own... I'm making an inference here. I think the states want help from the federal government.
Yes.
I think they want maybe martial law. I think they want the military. I think they don't think they can do it as states. So I think the way to do that...
But our administration has left this to states.
Correct.
And that's the direction that Trump is going in, is like call in the military, which I think is fucking scary. Like calling in active duty military in every city in the country. Like we saw with the protesters who got, the tear gas and the rubber bullets in front of the White House who peacefully protest. I mean, that shit to me is scary. And frankly, the fact that Democrats and quote unquote journalists on TV have acted like the world is ending every time Trump does anything, when he does do something like invoke the Insurrection Act and say we're looking at sending the military into American cities, there is no more language of this is unprecedented, this is outrageous, this is, different than what we've seen in the past left, because they've burned that up on every single thing that Trump has ever done. They have cried wolf. That's exactly the case.
What, if anything, can be done to stop these things from happening, and how
do you put the brakes on this thing? Indeed, well, I have to tell you, I'm not optimistic. I think that this is actually the people who are catching up to the fact that Evergreen has now spilled over into the world have not caught up to the fact that this is unstoppable at this point with the current configuration. The absence of leadership is going to prevent us from doing what we should do, and that means that the next set of predictions are far more dire.
Disciplined by a hard and bitter peace.
Today, the greatest risk of global catastrophe doesn't look like this. Instead, it looks like this. If anything kills over 10 million people in the next few decades, it's most likely to be a highly infectious virus rather than a war. Not missiles, but microbes. Now, part of the reason for this is that we have invested a huge amount in nuclear deterrence, but we've actually invested very little in a system to stop an epidemic.
So, you want to talk about COVID? What's really going on, is my question. There's a lot of confusion, a massive amount of people. There's a disease that kills some folks, and there's a disease that we, in the beginning stages of this pandemic, thought was going to be far more severe than it turned out to be, and they never adjusted. That's the problem. The problem is, it's still not good. You don't want to catch COVID, but the vast majority of people who get it will be fine. 78% of the people that are hospitalized are obese. The obese people have a real hard time with it. There's 6% of the people who died from COVID only had COVID. The other
90... Can you repeat that number?
6%.
One more time.
6% of the people who died from COVID only had COVID. The other 94% had an average of 2.6 comorbidities. You said when you sat down was absolutely perfect, that the timing could not have been better. Well, tell everybody what you do, Michael.
Well, thank you. I'm, for lack of a better term, a medical detective. I've spent my whole career tracking infectious diseases down, trying to stop them, trying to understand where they come from so we can make sure they don't happen in the first place, but most of all, trying to respond to situations just like this.
Just like this. And just off the bat, how serious is this? Is this something that we need to be terrified of, or is this overblown, or how do you stand on it?
On what limited data we have, would say this is going to be at least 10 to 15 times worse than the worst seasonal flu year we see.
10 to 15 times worse in terms of fatalities?
Yeah, and just illness. In fact, I brought some numbers. We conservatively estimate that this could require 48 million hospitalizations, 96 million cases actually occurring, over 480,000 deaths that can occur over the next 3 to 7 months with this situation. So this is not one that to take lightly.
What can the average person do? I see people walking around with masks on, wearing gloves. Is that nonsense?
Largely, yes.
Yeah.
First of all, let's step back. The primary mechanism for transmission is just the respiratory route. It's just breathing. This thing clearly jumped from an animal species probably the third week of November to humans. And pangolins, these scaly anteater-like animals, are a very good source because we have coronaviruses just like those in these animals. And it got into a human. So, we've surely had a lot of challenges with that, but I don't believe that there's any evidence linking this to an intentional release or an accidental release, or that it's an engineered bug. It's not. Absurd.
There's also an issue with the actual structure of the virus itself, right?
So, well, this is a virus that is ready-made for getting to humans. For the first SARS, we were able to track how it jumped, and you could see in retrospect how you could see it got closer and closer, and as the virus mutated, it became more able to infect humans. This virus showed up fully able to infect humans. As a matter of fact, in the comparative studies of different animals, including humans, humans are the most susceptible to the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So somehow you have to explain how this virus shows up kind of seemingly out of nowhere in Wuhan, ready for action, ready to fully infect humans. The leading website in the world that was just stating what is the evidence about the origins of COVID-19, particularly the evidence for a lab leak. And the evidence is actually really strong. It's all circumstantial evidence, but we don't have any evidence of the other hypotheses of where COVID comes from, like this series of jumps through different animals in the wild. And so I, for a long time, more than a year, have been saying, hey, we need to look really seriously at this. Not because we know, or certainly I don't know for sure that's where COVID comes from, but in my view, it's the most likely hypothesis worthy of a full investigation. But to say, like, we have a real problem here, unless we can just be really honest about what's the problem that we're facing, how are we possibly going to address it?
Now, what is the compelling argument against the lab leak theory? Do they have one?
That's fair. Yeah. So there's two things. There's argument and there's evidence. So the most compelling argument that I've heard for the natural spillover theory is that most of the pandemics, or most of the outbreaks over time, have been from natural spillovers. The vast majority of them.
Right.
That's a statistical argument. Now, that doesn't speak to this pandemic because statistics are just statistics. It doesn't tell you. It's not actual data, right? It's not actual facts. So that's one thing. Like SARS spilled over naturally. Now, I would say to that, SARS spilled over naturally where the bats are.
Right.
Not 1,000 miles where the labs are.
Where a penguin
which should tell you something.
Yeah.
Right. Or a palm civet or a raccoon dog or whatever.
Right.
And then what Peter Daszak will say on TV, who says all the time, is that, oh, well, we know that the market, the Wuhan market, the seafood market, they call it a wet market. It's just a market. You go to Asia, there's markets everywhere. Mm-hmm. We know that the market had the animals that could have been the pass-through animals. In other words, they had pangolins in the market. Now, that to me, that's not evidence either. That's just, again, a plausible theory. Now, why is it that despite a year of searching every pangolin and palm civet and mink and raccoon dog from, Kathmandu to Kabul, Peter Daszak and his friends they never found any pangolins linked to the outbreak, right? There's no...
Yeah, that's what I was going to get at.
I mean, look at we could not have crafted a virus like this to do what it's doing. I mean, we don't have the creative imagination or the skill set. If somebody said, okay, I want to find a virus that will take out a lot of people, okay? this one, Mother Nature does it so much better than we could ever do it.
Here's the bright side. Air pollution clearing up. Venice canals are clear. Homeless are being housed. Is that even true?
I don't know.
Water shutoffs are suspended.
Right.
That's countrywide. I mean, that's good. Evictions are being banned. Debt system halted. Is that true?
In certain areas, yes. To say that it's entirely being halted is untrue.
People are spending time with their families, which most people, the dumbest people I know are now homeschooling their children.
Yeah.
There will be
right.
a generation
right.
of children
right.
that cannot read or write.
Right, yeah.
The people I know that are like, yeah, I'm homeschooling my kid. I'm like, homie, you can't spell.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the lockdown?
Yeah.
It's all BS. And when you study what they're doing, I can sit on my phone and pull it up. They talk about in lockstep bringing in a global authoritarian system. They talk about riots. They talk about, and basically set up martial law. They even use those terms.
For herd management. I mean, it's the way we do it.
Well, what they're doing.
In Japan, where tonight nuclear officials there are warning of a possible nuclear reactor meltdown. They have been watching 3 facilities near the epicenter with concern all day, and at one of them, fuel rods are now exposed, and if they stay that way, they could release radioactivity and a disaster of unknown proportions.
I want to talk about what exactly is going on at that nuclear facility and that reactor, and for that we're going to turn to Dr. Michio Kaku. There's so many questions about what just happened. What does it mean, though? What is the latest that you've heard?
Well, this could be a Chernobyl in the making. We are now going into uncharted territory. We are thinking the unthinkable.
Well, breaking right now, radiation levels inside a Fukushima nuclear power plant damaged by that tsunami nearly 6 years ago is now at their highest point since that disaster. And experts believe melted fuel is leaking inside the plant almost daily, causing radiation levels high enough to kill a human being with just brief exposure. The latest readings now posing a serious challenge as officials prepare to dismantle the facility. Adam Housen covered that triple meltdown in Fukushima back in 2011. Is following the story, and he joins us live with more. Adam?
Yeah, Jenna, hard to believe it's been nearly 6 years. And when we initially covered that, it was that great video that came in that really showed the destruction that Japan had to endure from the earthquake and the tsunami. But no one knew at the time the growing threat, which today continues to only get worse. That was the tsunami that took out the cooling system at Fukushima that basically caused the meltdown of 3 reactors that continues to this day. In fact, we're told the most recent numbers due to those meltdowns that nearly 300 tons of radioactive water is dumped into the Pacific Ocean each and every day. The radiation levels, in fact, inside are now the highest level since 2011. Tokyo Electric Power Company, TEPCO, which is in charge of this area, reports that the radiation level has reached 530 sieverts per hour. To give you an example, it used to be 73 per hour. For people who don't know this stuff, let's put it into very simple terms. 4 sieverts can kill a handful of people. Right now, 530 per hour are being detected there. According to scientists, that's unimaginable radiation levels. A robot was sent in. It only lasted an hour before radiation took it out, basically ruined it. It found a 6-foot gaping hole inside that somehow has to be patched. Now, due to this high level of radiation, the company assures the public everything will be fine, but we've heard this information from Japan before. There's been criticism even back 6 years ago when this first happened that Japan wasn't giving all the information out. We do know this. They say it will take at least $300 billion and 4 decades to finally fix this area. It's the worst since the 1986 Chernobyl disaster. Again, also, as we're getting more numbers coming in, Jenna, to keep this in mind as well, they say that right now there's still radiation being detected off the coast of California and Oregon. Now, it's very small, but the worry is with 300 tons of radioactive water going in every day to the Pacific, what is that doing to the Pacific Ocean?
Как бы показаться это каким-то фильмом ужасов или сном, но это не сон. Это реальность.
30 years since the accident has become an important conservation area, not just for Ukraine but for Europe as a whole. So the recent data I've seen have up to 100 species which are in the Red Data Book of rare species in Ukraine.
угруповання відновлюються швидко. Але треба нам оцінити, що це буде за угруповання, чи будуть вони відрізнятися від тих, що були рідкісних видів рослин, які не можуть уникнути пожежі, вони можуть зникнути. А що стосується лісів, ліси це проблема більша, тому що щоб відновити ліс, потрібно десятки років як мінімум.
Now to Australia, where they're facing those massive fires, already among the worst in that country's history, with more than 12 million acres scorched. And officials are warning the next few days will be even worse.
Australia's bushfires have burned through 8 billion hectares of land since September. Remarkably, smoke can now be seen 12,000 kilometers away in Argentina and also in Chile. Have a look at this image from Santiago, which has come in the last few hours, with smoke seen across the city. Also, the World Wildlife Foundation is saying up to 1 billion animals may have been killed directly or indirectly by the fires. We also know almost 2,000 homes have been destroyed and at least 24 people have died. Among them, the 3 volunteer firefighters.
The Amazon rainforest is being consumed by fire. In fact, there's an 80% increase in fires just over the last year alone. And this comes, of course, after the hottest July our planet has ever seen. President of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, has banned setting fires to clear land for 60 days in response to the massive increase in the number of fires in the Amazon rainforest. Mr. Bolsonaro has faced intense criticism at home and abroad for failing to protect the rainforest. The Amazon, which helps to slow down the pace of global warming, has seen more than 80,000 fires break out so far this year. Right now, there are close to 2,000 burning in the region.
Firefighters, no match for flames this ferocious and this intense.
That curtain of fire igniting palm trees here on the Bolivian-Brazilian border, fueled by wind, the flames leaping across the dry brush.
It's shocking how fast we've seen this fire march. It's moved about 200 yards in the past 5 minutes alone, fueled by this wind.
That many of the fires were started by farmers trying to clear land. Environmentalists say Bolsonaro's seeming support for the development of the Amazon over environmental practices may have emboldened farmers to burn land.
We've seen a dramatic increase in deforestation in the Amazon recently, and it is driven by humans. And this is happening in part due to demand for food and other resources from the forest, and exacerbated by the decline in the enforcement of laws.
We are talking about an estimated 10% of the world's global biodiversity. Well over 40,000 species, new ones being discovered every single day. That is all at risk.
The area of smoke from these fires is so large it is visible from space. NASA releasing these images, a carbon monoxide plume hovering over the Amazon.
It's a double whammy from a climate perspective. We're losing forests, which are some of the best technology we have right now to slow climate change. Trees suck carbon out of the atmosphere. At the same time as the forests burn, we're releasing huge stores of carbon into the atmosphere. So it's definitely exacerbating the problem and making it that much harder to mitigate climate change.
The Amazon produces 20% of the world's oxygen and helps regulate the Earth's temperature. And Brazil is only at the start of its dry season.
We should all be concerned with pollution. We should all be concerned with human waste. We should all be concerned with the damage that we're doing to our water,
the damage that we're doing to the environment. There's a host of different things that human beings are involved in that are creating irreparable harm to the environment. We should absolutely be concerned with that. But what's weird is that you hardly ever hear about that. You hardly ever hear about doing something to curb the plastic in the ocean, doing something to eliminate some of the sewage waste that goes into the ocean. There's a ton of different things that we're doing that are huge issues. But instead, you hear about climate change, and it becomes this ideological left versus right battle, which is it's just very weird to me. And I understand that climate change is a real issue, and if the ocean water continues to rise, coastal cities really are fucked, and if the temperature does rise, we really might have to migrate to more, better climates. But there's a lot of other shit going on that seems to get ignored during this process.
Well, if you asked the Defense Department, you asked the CIA, you asked defense people all over the world, tell us what the great national security threat is. You know what it is? It is climate change.
There's a lot of people, though, that are skeptical of this. How would you convince them? I mean, this is a big part of the problem, right?
Climate change. Look, I am not the scientist. This is not my idea. I listen to the scientists. The debate is long over. Climate change is real. My God, look at what's happening around the world today. The worst, July was, I think, the warmest July or warmest month in the modern history of the world. The Arctic ice is melting. Heat waves in Europe. All right, just look out the window at what's going on. So this is not Bernie Sanders talking. This is the scientific community. Climate change is real. It will only get worse if we do not act boldly to cut carbon emissions.
We, you and I, and our government must avoid the impulse to live only for today, plundering for our own ease and convenience the precious resources of tomorrow. We cannot mortgage the material assets of our grandchildren without risking the loss also of their political and spiritual heritage.
How do we lead the world in transforming our energy system and creating the kind of jobs that we need?
It's important that we accelerate the transition to sustainable energy. That's why electric cars, it matters whether electric cars happen sooner or later. We're really playing a crazy game here with the atmosphere and the oceans. We're taking vast amounts of carbon from deep underground and putting this in the atmosphere. This is crazy. We should not do this. It's very dangerous. So we should accelerate the transition to sustainable energy. I mean, the bizarre thing is that obviously we're going to run out of oil in the long term. There's only so much oil we can mine and burn. It's tautological. We must have a sustainable energy transport and energy infrastructure in the long term. So we know that's the end point. We know that. So why run this crazy experiment where we take trillions of tons of carbon from underground and put it in the atmosphere and oceans? This is an insane experiment. It's the dumbest experiment in human history. Why are we doing this? It's crazy.
Have you heard about clean coal? The president's been tweeting about it. It's got to be real. Clean coal, all caps. Did you see? He used all caps. Clean coal.
Well,
here is what we have to do, in my view. Number one, we have to tell the fossil fuel industry that their short-term profits, and they make a whole lot of money, their short-term profits are not more important than the future of this planet. I don't think that's...
We must act today in order to preserve tomorrow. And let there be no misunderstanding.
We, you and I, and our government, must avoid the impulse to live only for today. We cannot mortgage
our future and our children's future for the temporary convenience of the present.
Speaker, Mr. Vice President, members of Congress, honored guests, my fellow Americans. We are fortunate to be alive at this moment in history.
Now, so there will be no misunderstanding, it's not my intention to do away with government. It is rather to make it work. Work with us, not over us.
But each proposal must be weighed in the light of a broader consideration: the need to maintain balance in and among national programs. Balance between the private and the public economy. Balance between the cost and hoped for advantages. Balance between the clearly necessary and the comfortably desirable. Balance between our essential requirements as a nation and the duties imposed by the nation upon the individual. Balance between actions of the moment and the national welfare of the future. Good judgment seeks balance in progress. Lack of it eventually finds imbalance and frustration.
I have therefore chosen this time and place to discuss a topic on which ignorance too often abounds, and the truth too rarely perceived, and that is the most important topic on earth: peace. What kind of a peace do I mean, and what kind of a peace do we seek? Not a Pax Americana, enforced on the world by American weapons of war. Not the peace of the grave or the security of the slave. I am talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living, the kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and build a better life for their children. Not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, but peace in all time. Finally, whether you are citizens of America or citizens of the world, ask of us here the same high standards of strength and sacrifice which we ask of you. With a good conscience, our only sure reward, with history the final judge of our deeds, let us go forth to lead the land we love, asking His blessing and His help, but knowing that here on earth, God's work must truly be our own.
We cannot continue the cycle of
imbalance and frustration.
Nor can we afford to lack boldness as we meet the future.
The state of our democracy.
And the very Constitution of the United States.
Our fate as a nation and our future as a people rests not upon one citizen, but upon all citizens.
We stand at an inflection point. We have an opportunity to defeat despair, to build a nation of prosperity and purpose.
Let both sides join in creating a new endeavor, not a new balance of power, but a new world of law, where the strong are just and the weak secure and the peace preserved. All this will not be finished in the first 100 days, nor will it be finished in the first 1,000 days, nor in the life of this administration, nor even perhaps in our lifetime on this planet. But let us begin.
I've always believed we can define America in one word: potential.